cloud of uncertainty harbours disaster. On the grey mornings of rain, an optimistic sun ray shines down on us again. As chaos breeds opportunity, resilience and unity, it's time to think again. We've went from overcrowded streets to almost solving a problem. As opportunity knocks, just not how we'd thought. Like you've got people stuck in pathways 24/7, 365 days looped. It's relentless and unforgiving. Feeling isolated in the busyness. Expectations give me dizziness. And a bid to find a place to call your home. Can you imagine wanting a new suit and someone decides what you're wearing? Stripped of power and choice, even robbed of your decision making. A disempowering recipe book, overused and undercooked, as silent voices hold the key to change. And when the whole world goes away to think about what we've done, winter could be spent indoors, creating change for those with none. It's surely a matter of urgency, decency and basic need. Public health matters, homeless lives bleed. I mean, we were rolling bonds in dusty streets. Numbers no adding up, but still cashing in receipts. I'm seeing CEOs' theories, I'm hearing multiple queries, but the voices are not heard for those within. With distorted intentions and payment by results, in a dehumanised system with labels and insults. Surely the cornerstone to success is a system built on aspiration, mixing resource with potential, creating alternate destinations, with transferable behaviours and the cockiness of the scheme, unimaginable lateral thinking, yet there's no platform for those dreams. Like I see leadership and opportunities for the gangs on the streets, with their entrepreneur mentalities, then less charges on the sheets. So if pressure can create diamonds, then a crisis innovations. I'm seeing the potential in poverty and a wider range of rehabilitations. Like everyone deserves the same opportunity, regardless of your postcode or status. It's time to start doing things with us, instead of doing things at us. Name your people casting out for Wi-Fi, hoping for connection, latching onto passing buses, then back to isolation. Then there's the voice of the community, with the highest stats and this and that. They need amplified and listened to their distant high-rise flat. Like, the sun never shines on my window or my street, but the rainbows I can see very clearly. And if we want to make change, real change, it needs actioned, together, and timely.
Wow, thank you for that, Nikki. That was a really powerful start to today. And I think absolutely that really sets the tone around we need action together. That was perfect. Thank you so much. So hi, everybody. I'm Lynn, and welcome to the last day of what has been an absolutely fascinating week of conversations as we launch the New System Alliance. So we've delved into all sorts of things this week, language, fixing, paradigm shift. We've heard from people within the systems, those who have really experienced it. So today we're going to hear from some of those who have put the thinking, the theory, the frustration and the passion into action. Specifically, we're focusing on those of us who have modelled the person-led transitional and strength-based response, which we've called the PTS, that some of you may know it as the Personal Transition Service. I think it's a working title that evolves as much as the learning. And we'll be hearing about experiences of doing this in practice. So the learning that's come out and how through influencing through the doing of what we do, we can inspire others. In typical fashion, this is a live conversation, so we've got no slides, no presentations, and the conversation will go where it goes. So I hope you can embrace that fluidity with us, hold the silences, I'm really bad at that, and be part of the tangents, see where we go. So we'll be hearing from those who have done this stuff for a while, those who have just started on the journey of systems change, but also about what's needed. So we're going to delve into governance and things like that around how some of the enablers for this work. Please feel free to use the chat. And I think this week the chat has been a really powerful way to hear from you, because I know the webinar format can feel a little bit barriered. And today we are focusing on one response, and we're not saying this is the answer. So I'd love to hear from you in the chat about what you're doing out there, the work, the thinking that you're exploring as we all come together around making systems change a reality. Please also ask questions. We'll be taking questions and bring those in either as we go or a little bit later. And after about 40 odd minutes, we'll have a break. So I'm going to kick off with a round of introductions. I'm Lynn, and I've been working with Mayday for, gosh, about 7 years now. And I think when I joined Mayday, we'd only just started on the journey with this stuff. So I've kind of evolved quite personally and probably unprofessionally whilst we've been part of that exploration and experience of working in a person-led way. So I've felt and adapted to the changes all the way through, which has been quite wonderful and painful at the same time. So I'm going to introduce the panelists by asking who you are and what brought you here. So if everybody wants to come off mute, you can jump in whenever. I might be mean, and I'll start off with Becky.
Thanks, Lynn. It was lovely to be here. So I'm Becky. I work for Changing Lives. I guess why I'm here in the broader sense is, you know, I suppose I've never really thought about myself as a kind of an activist, you know, and possibly because, you know, I did get involved with some kind of activism in my teens and early 20s. It always felt like there was someone with a megaphone telling me what I needed to think. And I think what I've always been quite uncomfortable with is a kind of narrow focus and sort of simple asks, but really passionate about taking action to kind of improve. And in the past, that's probably manifested itself in the kind of fixing that we've been talking about over the last week. But now what I'm really interested in is how we make practical changes that help sort of progress social justice. And so my involvement with the Personal Transition Service and with the Alliance is really about what I can do, I guess, as a leader of quite a big organisation to help create the conditions to do some of this change stuff. And I really loved what Nikki said about that kind of unimaginable lateral thinking. So not being here to say this is what you should do, but here to say, actually, can we think about this stuff together?
Nikki.
Hello.
Do you want to stay on this?
Yeah, well,
It's good to have you as part of the chat.
Yeah, no, it's really good to be here as well. I think for me, I suppose my journey started. Well, I work in Oxford, and I think about 2015, first going to this sort of line of work. My first role was went in fully energy, and I got a job in a hostel, and that got stripped for me reasonably quick. I sort of went in with some expectations and really try to do better for people, and just found that it wasn't even something that I'd thought of before, but it really it was quite disempowering. Everything was about risk, it was about safety for the organisation, and it just didn't feel right. And I think I had about 6 months, and I was thinking, is this even right for me? And because I was new to it, I wasn't really sure. And then that's when I got introduced to Mayday, and I actually told all this stuff in my interview as well. And when they agreed, I thought, yeah, this is the right place, and it just made sense. I think it was really about people, and just believing that we can do better. Although I don't work with Mayday now, it's definitely it's something that's aligned with my values, and it's something that I continue to carry going forward. And ultimately, I think we can just do a lot better together. So I wish I'd been at more of these during the week, but yeah, I'm really, really happy to be part of it today. So thank you.
Thanks, Becky. I'm holding the silence.
I'll go if you want. Awkward silence. Hiya, I'm Sarah. I am currently at KBOP, Kirklees Better Outcomes Partnership, and I've been working in this sector since a teenager, working with people in pubs, in hostels, in prisons, you know, on the streets, in their homes. And I do it because I love people, because I love being part of their aspirations, sort of working with them so that they can see what they want to achieve and how they want to achieve it. And I fundamentally hate the power imbalance within the system, the labels that people get assigned to, how that means that someone's possibilities, someone's future is determined by something that someone else has decided they are, putting people in boxes, and how that means you can only access something if you have the right score or the right number of things that are wrong with you, and how that means you can get a house, a home, something that's a basic human right, really. And then I became part of the Alliance because of that shared vision and that shared anger and frustration about what's happening within the system and what needs to change, and how people shouting up and people challenging it and saying what's wrong with it is a way forward and is a way to start the change. And then that's very much my ambition for our service, leading that change now in what we do and how we can make a difference working with the people that we're working with. So it's a really exciting time, and I'm really pleased to be part of it. So thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Sarah. Jane?
I knew you were going to do that. I was actually about to pitch in. My name's Jane Devine. I'm the chief executive of a charity in Edinburgh called Foursquare Scotland, but just Edinburgh. But we'll work that out over time. I've got quite a different route in from the people that have explained theirs so far. I had a lovely policy job where I went around in my kit and heels and my lovely dresses and had lunch at government offices and did all that kind of stuff. And policy in Scotland's really good. We've got really good policies and we've got a really open framework for getting things done. But actually, there was no achievement in that, because in that role, which was a lovely role, the implementation didn't really seem to matter. It was about, well, we say we do this, so we do that. And we've got the policies and the legislative framework to do whatever it is, and that happens. And the reality is that it doesn't. And so I decided that I'd been there long enough, and I came to run a charity, which is in a completely different sector, different way of working. And I suppose there was two things that went on. There was a sort of lack of chat about failing. And as a new chief exec in a new sector with a big charity to turn around, I knew that it wasn't going to be a linear path to success and that things were going to go wrong. And early on, when I was looking at what I might do with the charity, I came across Mayday Trust. It was through Homeless Network Scotland. And what struck me was an introduction that Pat McArdle had written about if you went into a meeting and you introduced yourself the way we expect people who are homeless or experiencing tough times to introduce themselves. This is what my introduction would look like. And it was incredibly powerful. And it made me think about what my introduction would be. And I wouldn't share that with you in a million years. And that got me thinking about what we could do differently. And then as I was in the chaos of a new organisation, Pauline Lunn, who works for Y People, approached me along with Maggie at Homeless Network Scotland and said, there's lottery funding, we could look at Mayday. And because I'd already been thinking about that, I was happy to jump on that bandwagon with them, because they were going to do all the work for the application for the funding, and I was in no place to do that. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
Thanks. Julie?
I'm Julie McEver. I'm the chair of Mayday Trust, of the Board of Trustees. I've been with Mayday for just over 4 years. Joined when they were about to embark on this, or had already started the Wisdoms, and wanted to do something differently. And they recruited a number of us. I think 5 or 6 of us joined October of 2016, sorry. And as part of the interview, what really struck me was the great opportunity and the challenge that it would be to help guide something that we had no idea what would become. And for me, what struck me most when I met the chair at the time, and Pat, and a couple other members of the board, was the statement that this, we've got some reserves. We're going to invest our reserves. This could go one of a few ways. It could all go horribly well. We could prove that what we believe in terms of strength-based working actually is right. We get the outcomes that we believe we should get the outcomes, and everybody buys into it, and we remain as a fully financially viable organization. That was the optimistic view. There was a view that we wouldn't prove it, and we'd have to close our doors and say, you know what, we tried, we gave it the best shot, and it didn't work. We could prove that it worked, but not find the funding and not be sustainable. And you could have any iteration between those three. And I thought that would be a really exciting thing to be part of, and has been over the last 4 years. We've been through our ups and downs. And I think the thing that I try to bring to the board and try to share with the board is that focus on the vision and focus on what are we trying to achieve? Have we proven the model? What else do we need to do to prove the model? What else can we do to support others to talk more and do more of what we believe is the right thing? And so far, the evidence absolutely is that this is the right thing. But how do we make that change, and how do we make it sustainable? And how do we ensure that we're able to last as long as we can? And it's been fascinating to be a part of the board, and I've been chair since the summer, to help guide and lead what we hope is, really exciting future. And there's been tough decisions and really hard things to do. So that's what's brought me here. I enjoy the challenge, love the challenge. My day job is local government consultancy and central government consultancy, public sector consultancy. So I hear a lot of what Jane says and what others have said, and see things on both sides. So it's been fascinating from that perspective.
Thank you. Louise.
So I'm Louise, and I'm with the BRIC. We're based in Wigan. I've been in the sector for over 22 years. And I think, you start to see people come, we did the traditional services and people started coming back over and over again. And when you start seeing them for the third and fourth time, it's easy to blame them that they're doing something wrong. But the reality is that actually it's what we're doing that is not fixing the problem. And there's no, we're not giving them the chance to do things their way. And we're giving them a predetermined set of ideas and questions on the pathway that they have to take without actually taking them, without actually letting them make their own pathway. So I think for me, I got to that point where I was just so frustrated that this just isn't working. And it was a light bulb moment, clearly a light bulb moment, when Mayday said they were looking for innovation partners. And when I did more reading up on it and everything, it just clicked. And how can it not work when you are giving control back to people? How can that not work? So for today, I think sharing is really important. I think it's really important to share the good stuff. It's also good to share the bad stuff as well, because not everything's perfect. And there, we've still got a way to go to make it perfect, if that is ever going to happen, because nothing's perfect in the world. And I just hope that this sharing of information, we can all make this movement, and it will be a big movement, a permanent movement for change. And that's why I'm here.
Thank you. So I thought I'd give this a little bit of context, because not everybody knows what we're talking about, I suppose, when we're talking about things like innovation partners and that sort of thing. Because it was going back to 2016, it was quite a big year. And we'd been prototyping this person-led transitional and strength-based response, which was based on what we'd heard from people experiencing services and those within the system. And we called it the Wisdom from the Street inquiry. And we heard how when people became homeless, the experience was often quite embarrassing, humiliating, and at worst, really quite re-traumatizing for people. And that the outcomes just weren't good enough. I mean, we kept seeing the same people coming back into our services, despite kind of ticking the commissioner box of successful move on. And obviously feeling that that wasn't quite right at all. We saw how some of our traditional ways of working were fixing, looking at needs and risks, focusing on deficits, which we knew just wouldn't work, because we were just keeping people in their area of weakness rather than focusing on strengths and abilities. So when we heard this, we really stopped doing it, and we lit this kind of metaphorical bonfire for all of the deficit-based paperwork and started walking alongside each person. So more having conversations, letting people lead, and we listened deeply and really responded to what people brought to us, focusing on, finding positive networks and communities outside of a kind of service response or a pathway, and really building on strengths. And in doing that, I think we realized that we had to completely transform every aspect of ourselves and our organization if this was really going to work. So this really included, all of our systems, internal structures, how we raised money, how we marketed, all of this kind of stuff. Really importantly, how we captured and measured impact, and I think most importantly, our culture. And after doing this for a while, we started to see kind of real progress, real significance in what we were doing. And we wanted to, if we were going to make it a thing, it had to be bigger than us. And I think we had no desire to kind of grow, be everywhere, pick up contracts. And we couldn't just do this alone, and we didn't really want to. So in 2016, we took this out. We had a couple of national events and we just put it out there and said, is anybody kind of brave or potentially crazy enough to join us as kind of early adopters with this stuff? So we could model it together and see what happened. And we called this the Innovation Partnership. And I think to our amazement, about 70 organisations came forward. And after a lot of conversations, a lot of train journeys, we found 7 people in organisations who really shared our vision and the values and took that brave leap of faith with us. And so I think everybody here today are very different parts of that. We've got, I think Changing Lives and the Brick came on quite early on. So real, you know, brave early adopters in that sense. Obviously, Jane's been working on it. How long for now, Jane? 9
months.
9 months?
Well, the project's been live since a week before lockdown.
Yeah.
That was good timing.
That'll be an interesting one to explore, actually. And then I think KBOP, you've been here probably very recently, not so much as an innovation partner, just really adopting that thinking. So I think just to give it that bit of context, because I know we've all talked about why we're here. What was it like taking that leap of faith to actually do it?
I'll go. I'll break the silence. Oh no, Sarah, you go now. After you.
Oh, right. We're over the ones that can't bear the silence, aren't we? So I think for us, it was a bit of a leap of faith, and it was very new. So for KBOP in particular, I joined KBOP in January, and it was a really new service. It's a fantastic alliance of some really incredible organisations, and then each of them have got their own expertise around domestic abuse, mental health, housing. They've all got their really good strengths in their individual areas. But when we set the contract up, we've been delivering for about 6 months, and we started to feel like we were hitting the target but missing the point. We felt like we were very much focused on the short term, what someone needed to do, how things needed to work, and that long-term aspiration, like what somebody wanted to achieve for the rest of their lives, it seems to be missing a little bit. So we were really lucky. We've got really supportive commissioners and fantastic investors in terms of the contract. And the strength of it being an outcomes-based contract meant we had the flexibility, and we were able to completely rip everything up and start all over again. And that's where we jumped in feet first with this asset-based approach. And we said, in order to do this properly, and in order to make sure that we're really achieving and whatever that person wants us to achieve, we've just got to completely start again. So we completely redid the funding structure, the rate card, the mechanism behind it. One of the first things we did is we completely ripped up the categorization of people that they were put in, which was one of my real frustrations, if I'm honest. So people were categorized into low, medium or high needs. And we were saying it doesn't matter what box somebody's put in, we should just be able to, for them to do anything they want to do, irrespective of whatever they're presenting with, irrespective of whatever their situation is. And we just stripped all of that away. And what that did immediately was give all of our partners the freedom to do whatever they wanted to do and whatever that person wanted to do. So we even got rid of, we've got no referral form anymore. We changed the IT system. We've changed everything, which everyone was really frightened about. Everyone was really nervous about. And the initial pushback was, well, we don't know everything we need to know. And we sort of kept going back and saying, well, why do you need to know that? You don't need to know that. The only question we ask everyone now is, what do you want to achieve working with KBOP? And that's it. That's our question to anybody contacting us. And that's the information we give to our partners. And credit to them, they've gone with it and they've rolled with it, been really flexible with it. And we're already getting that feedback from the people working with us in terms of accessing service and the people delivering, that they're achieving more, the individuals are aspiring more. We've got individuals accessing employment, whereas previously it would be seen as they weren't ready until we sorted out the housing and we got them in services and we went through the little tick box that you need to do. Whereas now we've got someone that's gone straight into accommodation, straight into a job, because from that first point of a conversation, they told us what they wanted and that's what they started working towards instead of following that linear restrictive path. So it was pretty terrifying, if I'm honest, but because of the commitment from the collaboration and the partners, it's been really good. It's been a really, really positive experience for everybody.
Thanks, Sarah.
So our experience is a wee bit different. I couldn't hold silence. We signed, I suppose it happened quite quickly after I came into post that we decided to partner up with other organisations in Scotland and look to maybe to be I've forgotten the word, innovation partner. So we started conversations around March in 2019. The funding came into place and we met the team in Northampton around sort of September, October time. And then our project was due to go live on the 13th of March 2020. And 10 days later, we went into lockdown. But just to sort of reverse back a bit, I think the thing that made me take the leap was that I'd come into a charity which was, not to put too fine a point on it, required quite a lot of modernisation. And the biggest thing that we'd forgotten was why we were there, I felt. I don't think people had realised they'd forgotten that, but it seemed to me that people had forgotten why they were there. People were trying to do a job that was based on procedures and compliance and delivering contracts. And actually the same people were coming around the system. And it took me a while to get my head into that because this wasn't a sector that I'd had a lot of experience of. I was also slightly taken aback, and I might not make myself particularly popular for saying this, but why else are we here? With the amount of press releases and shiny brochures that tell people what a charity does, and actually they don't do any of it, or they do some of it, but it doesn't make any difference. And I was getting really fed up with the sort of glossy, press releasey type culture that comes with quite a lot of charities about, and I get that you have to get money in and you have to appeal to funders, but it didn't feel like there was an awful lot of integrity in it. And maybe I was a little bit Pollyanna about everything, but I genuinely wanted to make a difference, and I wanted our charity to help people who had presented as homeless or having a difficult time and help them do what they wanted to do, whether or not that was around a tick box exercise or whether or not it was around what we felt was success. I wanted people to say, this is what I want to do, and us help them to find the ways that they could help themselves to do that. And we had a really interesting conversation about a fridge, and it went on for quite a while, and it seemed to attract conversations from all over the building about, well, what do you do when somebody needs a fridge? Do you just get them a fridge, or do you empower them to buy the fridge? And we had this big conversation that went all over the place, with somebody shouting, just buy the bloody fridge at one point, and us going, well, if we're taking this as an example of principle, maybe we shouldn't. And that kind of led to reorganising the whole organisation. So although we've got a small pilot with Joyce, Riley and Kirsten, who I'm going to give a wave to, who I think have logged on, who worked under really difficult circumstances, I'm really glad that we took the leap, because the learning going up to launching that pilot has actually started to influence how we're restructuring the charity. And the leap really came from looking at what we were doing and realising it just wasn't good enough, and it could be so much better, but we had to find an approach to do that. And as I said earlier on, listening to how Pat talked about introducing herself and why on earth we asked people to do that was what swung it for me.
Maybe we'll do that after the break, Jane. We'll introduce ourselves with our deficit.
Oh my God, I'll get sacked.
It's interesting hearing, Jane, what you're saying, and Sarah as well. I mean, I'd be curious if your organizations have ever turned down contracts because they aren't what you want them to do. So that's something Mayday's had to do. We've walked away from contracts, and over my 4 and a bit years, we've walked away from a number. And sometimes that is the hardest thing to do, is when, forget, it's not about capacity or capability to do it. Yes, we could have done them, but it wasn't aligned to what we felt we needed to be doing to make those changes. It can be very, very tough. It can be very daunting. You have to look at the financials and you have to think about, okay, how much longer do we have if we don't do this? And making those trade-offs. And, Mayday has continued to do that over the 4.5 years or so that, 4+ years that I've been involved. And, tough decisions in the last 12 months. And of course, with the pandemic and everything going on, it's constant, needs and you could chase the money. And many organizations do. And I get the shiny brochure bit as well. And, and you don't want that, but sometimes that, to be sustainable, to be viable, to get you to the next thing, or you use something to subsidize something else. And I think that is difficult, and there's difficult conversations to be had across it, from within the organization itself, the board, the senior team. You need to make sure everybody's really bought into it. So I'd like to throw that out there. How many people have walked away from things, and how difficult was it?
We haven't been in that position yet, because we have contracts that are 5 years with an option of extending them to 2, and a lot of them were in their infancy when I came into post. In terms of funding that we're looking for now, though, we're actually quite lucky, because the contracts that we have are all with City of Edinburgh Council, and most of them are outcome based. So there's a flexibility there to try this approach. I know that this approach works. It's whether we can make it work, but it has made us look at other contracts that have come up and decide whether or not they're for us. And it has also influenced our approach, to the point that we took our final strategic plan to our board on Sunday, to have a Zoom board meeting for Sunday morning, which was wonderful. And what we said in that was that we were going to focus on getting really good at what we do, and then deciding if that's something that we can help other people understand and get on board with, or something that we can take to other places and do. But the focus is not on growing and grabbing money and chasing contracts, which from looking at our finances, I think our organisation did in the past. But actually, the first step is, let's get really good at what we do. And inevitably, some of the contracts that we've got are allowing us to do that just now. Right. And they might not be quite how we want them to be. But that's the position that we're in. So it probably sounds a little bit silly to say, yes, of course I will do that in the future. I haven't done it yet, but I feel that I would do that in the future, and we're certainly reviewing how what we tender for, and what funding we get in and from whom.
I distinctly remember that board meeting, actually, when that was said, and it was, we are going to stick to our mission no matter what it takes. And I remember then having an SMT meeting afterwards with a flip chart going, so this is what it's going to take then. And that was so huge. And I think we actually had to halve the size of our organisation when we did that. Yeah. And I think it's really hard to do that, because there are people at the end of these contracts. It sounds very nice well, not nice, but it sounds very brave to say, we're giving back these contracts, and that's a great thing to do. But I think there's an awful lot that comes with, what does that really mean for people? And that it's a very hard decision to make, to actually see that through. So.
And that's something I think, Lynn, is very, very important. And how many times have we come back to at our board meetings? So what happens to the people we work with as a result of doing X, Y, or Z? And, and that is really important, to make sure that if we are going to walk away, that there is a transition, that we look after the people as best as we can, and we impress that upon others. But it is that balance between making sure we're doing what we believe from a mission and vision perspective we need to be doing, but at the same point, balancing our own sustainability and the people we work with. And I think it's never easy, but there's, there are ways through, and we've done that for over 4 years.
Yeah. I think with ours, to answer your question, we haven't, again, like Jane, we haven't been in a position where we've had to do that yet. But fundamentally at the back of our minds is, this is an outcomes-based contract. We do need to achieve certain things as part of facilitating the contract and keeping it going. And then some of the very valid queries and pushback from some of our partners was, if you're asking us to perform and to work to a certain number of outcomes to be achieved each month, and then you're saying, but you need to work in this way, and you need to make sure that you're not chasing the numbers and you're not achieving this, how are you going to manage that with us? Are you going to performance manage us when you're actually asking us to work in this way? And if you were truly asset-based, and if you were doing absolutely everything at the pace of that individual, how can you then turn around and say, oh, but we need 10 accommodation outcomes this month, or we need 10 access to service this month? So we did have this really challenging conflict right from the beginning, with that pushback from our partners to say, how can we do this if you want us to work in this way in line with a performance-based contract? But then again, echoing Jane's point, the whole point of an outcomes-based contract is to be flexible, to be innovative, and to be able to respond to that person. So our pushback to our partners was, if you're listening to the people you're working with, if you're doing everything that they want you to do, you will achieve all of your outcomes, because if we enable them to achieve everything they want to achieve, the outcomes will come. And we were sort of asking people to flip it and flip the culture and flip the understanding in that way. But that was a bit of a risky conversation to have, and that's the assurances that you need to give to the board and to the commissioners, to everyone. You're very right around that governance and that shift, that way of working.
Becky, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question about the contracts and how you work with commissioners. And you know, we came to the personal transition service from a point of view, I think, of, well, you know, we've got quite a lot of contracts and we've got a relative kind of amount of control within those. And actually what we did was we said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go and talk to our commissioners and say to them, we're going to change how we deliver the contracts we've got with you, and we're going to deliver the personal transition service as part of that. And you know, some of them wanted more information, some of them were just like, all right, crack on. And I think that's a bit of, you know, what we can sometimes, I think, get a bit hung up on. Oh, you know, this is what the contract says, or this is what the commissioners think. But actually, I think approaching it in that really human, relational way of going, we really want to do this, what do you think? And having that conversation was really helpful for us, because I think over the last 10 years, you know, commissioning has, although we're still really stuck in this kind of new public management, like kind of, you know, targets and outcomes thing, I also think the capacity of commissioning teams has gone down massively, and they don't have time a lot of the time to actually manage things. So actually, if you're going to them saying, you know, this is what we want to do, we want to do something different, what we've seen then is it has some contracts have then come through. We've seen that our strength-based ways of working has been reflected in that retendering, which has been great. Others, even when we thought, right, this is working really well in this area, had lots of conversations with commissioners and said, you know, when it comes to retendering, gone, we think this could work really well if everybody did this, took this approach. Actually, then come through being very, very structured. And what we've had to do in that is you know, tender for it and say, but actually, this is what we're doing, and seeing if they would take that up or not, rather than necessarily going, all right, well, for this bit of the contract, we won't do that PTS element. And it sort of works sometimes, and sometimes it hasn't. And you know, we've certainly got one contract that we retendered for on that basis, that now I would say, when next time it comes around, we have to really think hard about whether we would go for it again, because the way it's been structured, and it's been very, very kind of tightly structured in terms of pathways and things, it's not really working for people. So we're having those conversations now, but I think, you know, there's definitely those kind of crunch points, I think, you know, for us. Now that we've kind of tested it, we've done the next step, and it's like, okay, well, now we really need to start thinking about it. Because I think if you know, I think the message is definitely not say to people, right, you just need to hand back all the contracts that won't let you do what you want, because that won't change anything. They'll just get hoovered up by organisations that will meet those tick boxes. So I think it's a really interesting conversation to have, and I think there's lots of room for different approaches in that as well.
Nikki, from your perspective, when you've been, well, you are a practitioner in this space, because I know that we always try to kind of keep the contracts away from, I hate the word frontline, but the practitioners, those that are doing the work at the front, so you can work for the person in front of you. What's your experience been? Because I know, you know, you've worked in lots of different places, but around having that, almost that pressure in the back of your mind of outcomes and contracts when you're trying to work with people, and has that felt like a thing?
Or more as of recently, since I've left Mayday, or?
Well, both really. And I don't know if you felt a difference.
Yeah, I think it's a fine sort of balance, and ideally, in and around sort of outcomes and timeframes, and sort of it just makes everything difficult, really. But I think in my time at Mayday, I think it sort of really looking at developing assets and stuff, and that was quite separate, I think, to my role then. I didn't pay it as much attention. I think now, as sort of things have changed, I've got involved quite a lot more, and it's looking at, like, we're sort of, like, where I work at the moment as well, we're sort of developing a lot more around sort of like workforce transformation, and yeah, looking at sort of the wider sector, and there's a lot of elements within that. I think that the conversations and interest I've had locally with commissioners is there's interest to sort of change things, but I think to try and get it to fit a model that is so different, that's looking more about, it's hard to sort of measure an outcome for an individual, I think, as a sort of generic framework. So I think how you can then sort of create something that's just different and it's reflecting individuality as opposed to group numbers, or within 6 months you've done 25 of these things, that actually doesn't mean nothing for the sustainable sort of future of any individual. I think that's where the most of the work does. But I see like commissioners, like strength-based practice, strength-based approaches, different models, recognising that a lot of the approaches are sort of, I'm going to say, but they've been proved that they're not achieving what they could. But I still think, yeah, it feels like quite a bit away off getting where it should be, really.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Nikki. And I think, sorry, Louise, I'll come to you next, because we had a social impact bond in one of our areas, and we always said, when we're measuring outcomes, it's we measure sustained accommodation, employment, education, training, and these are the things that, I guess, from our experience, are things that people have kind of generally wanted for themselves. So we've really moved away from measuring around, reduction of substance misuse or reduction in reoffending, because actually that's quite a deficit approach to kind of bring those out, to kind of measure people on those things, because the focus on having a good life for people is often, I want a home and I want a job. So we've had to be quite clear in what it is we measure and what we don't, I guess, unless people bring that to us, and then that's obviously something that we work with people on. Louise, you wanted to come in.
I was just going to say that in relation to, have we turned down work or anything? We had some really positive outcomes. A very similar contract came up again, but because they're going to monitor on the way that they did before, which is a very deficit-based monitoring, we've decided not to go for it this time. Now, what we're hoping is that in the future, we will be able to make positive changes to the way they commission services, and they'll start looking at it from a deficit point of view. And it's not easy to say no to that contract, because like Becky said, somebody will pick that up and they'll start delivering those services, and they'll do it the way that the commissioners want it to. And that's a very difficult thing to let go. And I'm not going to say it's easy, and I'm going to say that, we're fortunate that we're in a position that we can actually, still continue. The staff delivering the other contract, their roles were coming to an end, and it would have been very easy for me to say, well, actually, let's go for this contract so that we can keep those roles on. But that would have been the wrong reason to go for the contract. The contract has to be what we believe in. So we actually have not applied for one tender because we didn't feel it suited us.
Brilliant. I'm wondering if that's a good place to have a quick 5-minute break, or maybe 4, because I know our slide's 2 minutes and we can play that twice. So if we can all come back just before 10:50, go and grab a coffee. And when we come back, maybe we'll start looking at culture. I think that's quite a nice one to look at. But thank you all. See you in 4 minutes. Hello, welcome back. Hope you've all managed to grab a cuppa. I just wanted to quickly pick something up that I saw in the chat just now on the break, around when we're looking at commissioning and giving back contracts. And somebody quite rightly pointed out that it's a lot easier to do that when you have reserves, when you're a bigger organisation, when you're able to kind of move and pop up in different places. But actually, when you're stuck in one place, you have one commissioner. That's often, you can do the best with what you've got. And I think it was just important to mention that.
And actually, we've got no reserves. That's why we can't just say, let's hand them all back and do this differently. We had to do quite a lot of improvement work in the charity to make it safe and to make it compliant in legislative terms with GDPR and with even building regulations and things like that. So we don't have any reserves. So we're not in a position to just say, sod it, we're going to do this, and we can keep going long enough to work out whether or not it's going to work. So we're doing the pilot. If we did have more money, then I would have seriously thought about one of the tenders that had just been submitted when I started, but we weren't in that position at that point. So I read that as well, and I really resonate with that. And hats off to the people that worked for 15 months with no pay, because I'm not sure I could do that, or I don't know if my staff could. So to put that much commitment into it, I think is really laudable. But we're in the position where we've got enough funding, we'll build up our reserves, and then we can probably afford to be slightly more radical. I think if you were starting from scratch, you could maybe do that because you're not taking that risk. But yeah, going for 15 months without a salary, I think's some amount of dedication.
Yeah, definitely a very brave thing to do.
No, it is, and I'm struck. I mean, I checked out the questions in the Q&A at the break, and about. I'm fascinated by commissioners, so I want to come back to that one. But in terms of the reserves and everything, absolutely, it's not an easy situation. And Mayday, has been at the brink a couple of times where we've had to consider, what the situation we're in. And some of it has been having conversations with commissioners where you can have that really good, productive conversation and move them in the right way. Others, we've not been able to, and then it becomes a strategic decision. The other thing that we've done is whether or not, how many contracts have you taken a look at, or tenders where it won't really cover the cost? Then what do you do? How do you make sure that you can still, because actually it's the right thing to do. You want that contract because it is with the commissioner that they see what you're doing. But again, how can you subsidize it? How can you keep going and making it happen? It's never easy, and there are people absolutely on all sides of this. It's our staff, it's our senior team, it's the people we work with, it's those that we influence. There's so many people that you've got to take into consideration, and by no means am I saying this is easy at all. It's I asked the question because it's a bit provocative, and this week has been that. Coming back about commissioners, I think commissioners can be a very provocative topic. There are great ones out there, and there are those on the other end of the scale, other end of the scale, and I think that's really, really difficult. And I'm pleased to hear this week and this morning so many people who've had productive conversations with commissioners, and it's great to see and to hear that things are changing. I did a commissioning piece for my day job probably 6-7 years ago, and I was just mortified because what people are saying on the ground is so different to what commissioners were saying, and finding that way to work together for what is right for the people can be extraordinarily difficult. And and just having an outcomes-based contract does not fix that necessarily. You've got to be able to support that as well. And somebody's just said commissioners can be trapped in the system too. I totally agree, and I feel for them. What is good commissioning? That was the question I asked, I think 6-7 years ago, and there's a lot of different answers about that. And I think it continues to evolve, and it's fab to hear that people are in the right place, but there's still a lot of work to be done. We know that.
Yeah, and we actually lost one of our innovation partners because they couldn't get that commissioning, and actually the work that they were doing was so spot on, with regards to that person-led approach, the strength-based approach, and it was wonderful. And it was just such a shame to see that fall through the cracks because it didn't fit into the commissioning response.
Yeah, just to chip in on that as well, I think, it's a very, very difficult one because it's getting that balance between sort of being commissioned, but then also, even though I think a lot of work can sometimes be quite unintentional around sort of like process and forms, and where that people can unintentionally sort of re-traumatize people to an extent as well, and just go through normal processes. But I think there's also a way that you can sort of still become more person-centered within your organization and develop and change some of the processes to become more within that sort of framework, that PTS framework. So I think, it's hard because if you're smaller charity or whatever, to be able to sort of refuse contracts, but then you've still got people at the other end who are sort of reliant on that support, and you can make changes internally as well. I think that would be a must for me, and that's something that we're currently sort of looking at and stuff as well. It's just around the impact in language, forms. How do you feel when you're sort of filling out a form? Fill it out yourself. How do you feel? Adding that sort of emotional intelligence and into your approach and stuff as well. So yeah,
thanks. And I think that's really important. And then it kind of goes to a point that I was thinking of around kind of disruption and the sometimes seeking forgiveness, not permission. But also around, I think our approach has always been that when we influence through our doing. So you might have a contract that requires you to work in a certain way, but often by modeling the difference and almost showing the difference while you're in that space can have a real impact. Because I know even when we have got contracts and we've got them from quite what we might call enlightened commissioners, there is still the constant challenge of things that will come up that we have to challenge quite proactively. You know, I remember forms coming up in one of our areas that were, you know, I think it was a health form, and it was so very incredibly deficit based, and we just refused to do it, but then had the conversation and were invited in to say, well, talk to everybody about why is this not feeling right? And in the end, they scrapped it. And it was, you know, you can have that kind of influence through kind of pointing at what you do differently when you are in that space. And that can be quite an impactful way to bring about change. And I guess I'm going to throw out there around disruption and around influencing through doing, and really put out, what have your experiences been of that, about modeling the difference? And have you got any examples of where that's had an impact and a change?
I might not just answer that question entirely, but what I was just thinking then was about, we haven't talked much about the global pandemic impact over the last week, which I think is probably a good thing. But one of the things it definitely did was disrupt that commissioner-provider relationship, because actually what people had to do was just get on and do what they thought was the right thing. And what we absolutely have to guard against is romanticising that crisis response, because actually it's dead easy to like give people food parcels and do dead practical things, and actually that was what might have been needed at the time. But what I think it did show was that actually there was the power, certainly I think in a lot of our services, shifted a bit, and it wasn't a bit like, oh well, the commissioners will be okay if we do that. It was actually this is the right thing to do, and we just need to get on and do it, and then we'll tell them about it later. And I think that, for me, is a lesson in terms of some of this stuff. And I think that absolutely asking for forgiveness rather than permission where you can. Because I think sometimes it takes a long time. So you might feel like you're kind of disrupting this, but actually, you know, you kind of disrupt it within your own contract and with the people that you're working with. But actually then how that leads through to how other things work might take time. And I think that's been our experience, is that it's kind of shifted things gradually rather than necessarily kind of done a big kind of disruptive of the local system. But I know that other people have had very different experiences of that. And I think it's really important that we reflect the diversity of those experiences.
I think we've got a couple of examples from, oh, sorry, Nikki, do you want to? I think we've got a couple of examples from my previous role as part of GM Homes Partnership, which we learnt using those to bring to the new role at Kirklees. And that was about disrupting on a sort of a systemic level, but also a local level. So we had multiple partners that we were working with, multiple housing providers, and we would have individuals that had sort of previously been refused from accommodation, you know, previously had to go through a massive waiting list. And we said, you can't do that anymore. You need to work with that individual, understand where they want to go, where they want to live, what they want to do, place that person straight into accommodation, and then not just revert to previous behaviours. So as soon as something goes wrong, they get evicted. So we were constantly challenging back with our partners to say, is that enough to make someone homeless? Is that enough that you want to put someone back on the street again? Is the way that they're acting directly related to their tenancy, or is it actually something to do with childhood trauma that they're now dealing with because they're in a safe and stable environment? And we were flipping the conversation back to people all the time, disrupting their way of working, if I'm honest, in terms of them as partners, disrupting their policies, their processes organisationally, whereas antisocial behaviour departments would previously get involved, and we were like, no, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, this is what that person needs. And we would have recommendations that somebody had to engage with services to be able to sustain their tenancy. And we would say, going to a service, going to an alcohol group is not what that person needs. We need to understand why that person feels that they can't cope in that house they're in, and look at changing that situation rather than forcing someone to go and attend a course or something like that. So we started small with the disruption, if I'm honest, and we did it on a very individual basis. But every time we found something that worked, we then shared that and replicated that across the network, across the partnership, and said, this is how you need to work in order to respond to the needs of these people. And then it was a bit of a ripple effect. So slowly, that cascaded across all 10 boroughs of Greater Manchester, you know, all 20 providers that we were working with, and we began to see the difference, that way of working. So I think for us, although we wanted to achieve quite large systemic change, we started small, and we started on an individual basis, on a personal basis, with one provider, with one housing officer, you know, with one chief exec, and then replicated that and rolled it out across the whole of Greater Manchester, really. And it worked. People started to listen and started to make that change.
Thanks, Sarah. There's a question that's come in from the chat, which I thought was an interesting one to look at, from Hannah. Thank you, Hannah. And she said, I was wondering what sort of structures you have that enable people who use your services to give advice on decisions about your organisation. Do you sit down together and chat about things very often? And I think that's a really interesting one, because I know from Mayday's experience, we don't do that anymore. And I think part of the person-led approach and our real focus on deep listening. So we listen to people collectively, and that really informs our strategy. So we don't kind of set strategy in the boardroom. It's really fed up from the grassroots, but also through the PTS approach, because you're listening to people and working on that kind of one-to-one level. There is no kind of co-design of the organization. It's almost the organization had to change to respond in that one-to-one capacity with that person. So we don't tend to have the kind of focus groups and those conversations to say, well, tell us what to do. We've changed everything we've done so we can do what that individual needs at that point when they're ready. And I don't know if you've had experiences of that with the PTS or within your organizations about how do you do that?
I'll just jump in. Oh, sorry.
No, you go.
I was just going to jump in and say it's not easy, because, you know, we've had years and years of the provider taking control and doing everything for that, and that's come, you know, over many years. I've been in this sector obviously more than 20 years, and you know, we do for people, so that's really difficult to give people the power. And so you know, some of the feedback I had from the staff when I asked them to give me, you know, some of the feedback, they said that once they actually did give the power back to the person, which is not easy, they actually felt that their work stress was actually a lot less, was reduced, because you know, it is very stressful thinking, you know, almost in a way playing God, what does this person need, and how can I put in place something. So giving that back to them is really, really important, but it's also very, very challenging, because the other thing that probably, in answer to Hannah's question and what you've said, Lynn, is if when the personal transitions, the PTS staff are with people, feeding back that information so that it doesn't come back in a way that is like your typical you know, service user group, and that can be very difficult. But once you've got that in place, and it's about the listening of the people, and it's sort of this culture that evolves, and things start to happen and be brought up to the board level, that everything just sort of evolves around it. I know that's a really wishy-washy answer, and it's not very you know, clear, but once you start doing it, you see these things happening, so that you don't need to have these physical group sessions with people, because things are coming up and they're feeding up anyway. And that's how we've managed to learn to take on that information from people and how we change things. But it's not an easy thing, because you have to give full control to the person. You've also got to give full control to the staff. They have to have full control and autonomy, and that is again very difficult, because if you are used to really managing the staff in a certain way, you know, just letting them get on and do it, there's a huge trust that has to be built. And from them doing that to working with people, these are how you get the information back about how you can change things.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, and especially when we look at the impact on individuals when we're asking for feedback and steering organizations. And I think, you know, with the PTS specifically, we try to kind of keep that experience as normal as possible. So not trying to make somebody a spokesperson or a representative of the organization, because it's about people transitioning and not being kind of sucked into our systems and our world. You know, I always compare it to, you know, if I go to private counselling, I'm never asked to come and kind of have a say on how the counselling is run, or or any of my experiences that I go in, I do what I want to say when I want to say it, and I leave. So it's kind of, where do we put the onus on that, and who does the listening, I think, is really important.
Can I just chip in on that as well? I just think, I think it's a very sort of fine balance, and it's something that we noticed within a lot of the decision making and the way that things were happening, like specifically in Oxfordshire. There was just a lack of any sort of opinion or what people would like. So we set up a sort of a new group that's just been gone over about a year really. And it's more about just enabling a process. It's not a set group or anything. It's that there's some sort of consultation for any new projects that would work with like any sort of people that would be coming in. So if it's to then add sort of personalisation into your room, if you want to sort of, if it's a new housing project or whatever, let's try to then set up processes and opportunities for people to sort of really be heard. And if you want to say that it's rubbish, you're not in fear of your landlord or whatever sort of feeling that they're in control and that you can't say anything. So I think that's something we've been developing. It's trying to just let people, sorry, my doorbell's ringing. But yeah, just try to let people have the opportunities if they want to, and feel that they've got control and decisions about what the future could look like. Sorry.
Yeah, and you do it on that one-to-one. Is that me?
Bit echoey all of a sudden there, Lynn.
Hang on. So I was going to say, if you when you do this on this one-to-one level, that is happening in that space at that time. And I think that's always been a fascinating thing for me. It's around, working with people to kind of see that some of the systemic barriers that might be coming up in their way, kind of putting that into real context for people. But they own that. And I think that's been one of our biggest shifts away from how do we kind of move the listening to people to feed that up, but not to make them have to physically do that it's kept within that relationship. I wondered if, because you touched upon it, Louise, and I think it's a really important point around our cultures, that when you do start to shift power, you need to have a very different culture in place in order to hold this stuff and for this to work across organizations, so you don't kind of default into these places. And how have you changed your cultures so they become more about responding, adapting, listening? Because it does feel very different, I think, to kind of traditional kind of top-down cultures that some of us may be used to.
If I just go by saying it's something that you've got to do daily, hourly, it's you're constantly challenging. The culture comes because you're constantly challenging things that come your way, and that everybody believes in it. So the staff believe in what we're doing, the trustees believe in what we're doing. So the culture comes from us challenging that doesn't fit. And like I said before, we are in a bit of a cushy area that we can turn things down. We haven't always been that way. We used to have to grab every contract that was out there just to survive. But we've now been in a place that we can turn certain things down. But the culture happens when everybody truly believes it and buys into it. And if there are people that don't buy into it, then they're probably in the wrong place, because if our culture is that we're asset-based, we're constantly fighting it. We're fighting it from, or businesses that say, can we have a quote from one of the people that you're working with to say how, the change, we have to say no, that we have to change that. And that is something that happens daily, and everybody has to fight towards it. If we let things leak in, it can snowball out of control. So it's not easy, and it's a constant struggle. You've constantly got to, but what gets you through it is if you truly believe it. If you believe that this is the right way, if you believe that giving people their own power, their own voice, and we stop being their voice, then everything else is easy. But you do have to constantly challenge that, and that's how we find it.
Yeah, and it's something I think came up in the week as well, that none of this is going to change unless we start changing ourselves first and really holding up that mirror. And I'm gonna talk to Sarah about that quickly, just because I know you've been on one hell of a journey. You've been part of the PTS qualification, and a big focus of that is not to train and tell, but to reflect and unlearn.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could share a little bit about that, Sarah.
Yeah, so when we started making the change, we wanted to do the PTS qualification so that we were doing it properly, if you will, and doing it in line with that vision rather than just us saying, oh, we're going to do this. But I found the course really challenging and really difficult. And I think there was one particular session and I was furious and I nearly turned it off halfway through because it was almost, how dare you say that everything I've done is wrong? How dare you say that everything that I've been doing throughout my career, sort of trying to enable and empower and work with people, has actually kept them in that box and perpetuated how they feel. And the forms I've been filling in have just been making people feel horrendous. And I suppose it was opening my eyes and that acknowledgement of that I'd been sort of facilitating that and everything that had been happening within that. And it was really hard to take on board because it made me feel like I'd been making the whole thing worse when everything about my belief and everything about my own sort of values and vision, it felt like it was wrong, and I'd actually been damaging people instead of working alongside them to enable them. And it was really difficult, and it was absolute rage during one of these sessions, and I had to walk away and just calm down. And there was a colleague with me who felt the same, and afterwards we were both reflecting on it and we were like, oh my God, is that right? Is that what we've been doing? And we've been sort of making people feel like that instead of working alongside them, enabling them. And I think because I'd always prided myself in how I've always worked with people and thinking that I've been listening to people and working alongside people, and then that sort of realization that maybe I haven't, maybe I have been sort of putting them into a box and sort of making something worse for someone. And then thinking back of my years working in the hostels and everything, you're like, oh my God, I really did. And it was very hard, and it was a real eye-opener, I think, about that unlearning and what we need to do and how we need to change.
We've had that fed back to us from the team that we've got as well, that some people almost feel remorse and guilt for how they've practiced when actually what they thought they were doing was the right thing, and that's what they were told that they were doing was the right thing, and the contract said that was the right thing. But actually when you reflect on it, it probably wasn't the right thing. In fact, it wasn't the right thing, but there was no one there to, you thought you were doing exactly what you were meant to do. And I know that Kirsty and our team have reflected on that, about what they've done in the past, and we had conversations about when some of them worked in community-based services and going into sports shops to buy somebody an item that they had money for in a brown envelope, and somebody else was talking about not wearing work clothes in a lanyard when they go to meet somebody to have a coffee and chat about how they're doing, and just little things like that make all the difference. And I know I was being quite flippant earlier on about the conversation about the fridge, but the conversation about the fridge was, do you empower someone to buy a fridge, or do you buy it for them? And there was a real sort of, well, of course you're just going to get them a fridge because they've got 5 hungry kids at home and they need chilled food. And then the other part of the conversation was, but if you give into that all the time, then you're just doing the exact thing that we're trying to change. And I think we've got 3 out of a staff team with volunteers and with our social enterprise of nearly 100. We've got 3 people who are piloting this approach, and they've been piloting it from Zoom calls during lockdown, because they've only had 2 weeks out of lockdown to do that, and to try and convince people and to educate them and help them to understand that approach when you can't show them and you can't be right beside them has been incredibly challenging for them. But when you do get through to people, it is that guilt, and you're trying to support them starting to feel bad about how they've practiced their whole life, which is really difficult, and it doesn't feel like they've done anything wrong, but actually it's quite an awakening, I think, when you read through all the things, and obviously you've got into it in huge depth, Sarah.
And I think it's really important that we don't kind of become the strengths police, and we're not sitting here going, well, actually, that's not very strength-based, you shouldn't have done it. Because I think, for me, the culture thing is about those skills for reflection, isn't it? So, last week maybe we did buy the fridge, we thought about it, maybe we shouldn't have bought the fridge, but this week, actually, it's a different style for people. And I think, for me, one of the things that we've really been working on organisationally is how, because we talk about reflective practice and all the rest of it, but actually, how do we really help people develop those skills? And I think that's for us, it's like actually learning from each other and doing that real kind of peer learning about reflection is so much better than me saying, right, everybody, you have to do reflective practice now, because, you know, people go, well, what, you know, whatever. But actually really trying to embed that through the organisation of like, how do we reflect on what we do, and how is this all kind of chiming into where we think we're going around our values, but also just, you know, are we doing the right thing? And I think, you know, culturally, that's a massive thing for me.
I wonder if the pandemic actually damaged that, because in that sort of, it's lockdown, we've all got to respond to this really quickly. People sort of, you could see some people really in their comfort zone of doing things. I mean, we've had so much food in our hostels, we had to throw it out because everybody was going to provide food, because that's what people who are homeless need. And everyone was going to provide this, and everyone was going to provide that. And we had, you know, it felt like things were regressing a little bit, I thought. And people quite liked that because they could just do things. And they did need to do things. Things need to be done really quickly, but it did sort of start, I felt that had quite an influence on how people were thinking about how they supported people who are having tough times.
That was definitely our experience. And I think by doing that kind of person-led approach, you know, we didn't have a knee-jerk response to food packages or anything like that. We just spoke to people and said, "Are you all right? What do you need?" And actually we found a lot of people were supporting us, you know, well, the coaches that were working with them, because they were like, we're quite used to this, some of this stuff, some of this isolation. Are you all right? And actually, you know, the response to come in and fix, I think, took away a really good opportunity for some people who would have taken their own agency to speak to a neighbour, to ask somebody else to say, actually, I could do with some shopping, are you going? You know, that sense of community and that sense of just being normal in this space was kind of almost overridden. Yeah. But we had a hell of a backlash from a lot of other providers saying, you're not doing anything, why aren't you doing anything? And it was fascinating.
It was. I think what was really interesting, we did a big piece of sort of listening work and going along those principles of actually getting someone who, you know, one of our team who was already trusted by that person, just to have a conversation about, you know, what's going on for you right now, you know, how actually should we be trying to move our way out of this, you know, the new normal, whatever. And that's one of the things that came through really strongly from people was that, you know what, it wasn't, yeah, I had more food than I could deal with. I didn't need all these food parcels. But the big thing that made the difference is when, you know, my social worker or my doctor or whatever started off the conversation with, oh, how you doing? Because they never normally start off the conversation with how you doing. It's normally like, all right, let's look at the list, you know, but actually we were feeling it, you know, as professionals. And so that then came over to people, and it was much more of a human-to-human relationship.
So I guess one of the things that's coming out for me as well is, you know, this stuff, you know, this isn't just our stuff. This is just stuff we've been doing. How do we give nerve for it? Because I think there is something around, it takes a hell of a lot to do this and to step out of the comfort zone, to hold silences, but to hold culture, to lead on this stuff. How have you kept your nerve with it? And not just thought, it's just too hard. You know, actually, sometimes it is easier to just think, gosh, you know, let's just take the contract and then we'll be all right. Or you know, let's just work in this way and then it'll be easier. Who do you go to and how do you kind of keep that nerve to keep going as kind of leaders, I guess, in this space?
I think that builds on a question that's come, or a statement that's come up in the chat as well around support. And I think one of my hopes for the New System Alliance is that and these conversations this week is about people supporting everyone who's trying to do similar things or slightly different things, but for the same kind of reasons. And we're trying to move in the right direction, is that we're all there to support each other. So for me, I mean, what keeps, at least, you know, what I get a lot of joy out of is when we see the data that we get presented with every so often, and the stories behind it, which are anonymized, and, you know, we don't, you know, it's not about doing this, but it's showing how what we're doing is helping people in so many different ways, and how this person pursued this passion, or this person has gone down this path, and it's knowing and feeling confident in what we're doing, and seeing those positive stories. And it's very easy to get bogged down in the negatives, absolutely, but it's those positives that I think are really helpful, and sharing it across it. This week has been fascinating to hear about all the other organizations, what they're doing similar challenges and different challenges, but how everybody is focused on that end goal. And I'm really hopeful that this alliance will provide a bedrock to that, which I probably hadn't thought about before. Maybe I should have. But, you know, hearing that and then seeing that question come up here, it really is around how we all can support each other in doing what we all feel is the right thing for the people that we work with. Every person is going to be different. Every organization is going to have different circumstances. But how can we support each other to keep moving in that direction? Because it's the little things that will make the big change happen.
Yeah.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And what has kept me going in this role and in previous roles is that like-minded support. So if you believe something, you've got one person saying, yeah, that's the right thing to do it. You're like, right, okay. But then more importantly, it's somebody's story that's experienced that and experienced that change. And I think we had somebody talk to us this week that said nobody had ever asked them what they wanted. So they contacted us and we said, right, what do you want? How can we sort of get you to where you want to be? And he said, oh, you've got all my information, you know, my social worker sent it. And we're like, well, we're not interested in that. What do you want? And he couldn't speak. He paused. Nobody had ever asked him what he wanted. And then he sat and talked for ages and told us all this stuff and everything he wanted. And he was baffled by the fact that we were actually asking him instead of just going off a piece of paper that's obviously followed him all his life, because I think he was a care leaver. And that is what's keeping us going. So his response is the one we said, right, it's working. This is what we need to do. And that's what we shared with all of our partners. And then to have that support within KBOP, we've set up this like ambassadors group, and we're using it as a bit of a therapy session, if I'm honest. So we've got our person that's a lead within each organisation, and they can come and just say everything they want to say, and then get the support from the rest of us, and then go back out and carry on sort of pushing and leading in their individual ways. But they've got that core support in the middle that reassures. We can share the story, share information. And in fact, we've been using information from Mayday. I keep harassing Lynn all the time for different things to share out, and different YouTube, different clips and everything, just to bring it to life. So then it goes back to the ambassadors and it goes back out to everyone. But it's that support, it's that reassurance that this is fundamentally the right thing to do. Things have to change, and it takes people pushing that change in order to make it happen.
I think as well, it's about how we can sort of bring ourselves closer together as well, and sort of sharing, like what you said there, Sarah. It's about sort of bringing like best practice, because I think like we are the system, but I think it's how we can bring that sort of collaboration, like practice and approaches, because like 95% of people are like I work with or I've worked alongside or for different organisations. Everybody wants to do the best, but I think it's that once you can show or prove that there is actually a different way, the majority of people wouldn't want to go back. But it can be quite difficult, obviously, when you're in somewhere that is quite set in that way. But I think that, yeah, if we could just have more opportunities like this sort of thing, but just sort of bringing together practice. And one of the things I found good was when I was at Mayday, it was the moving the model forward. And that was like that sort of critique, it was that reflection, it was sort of looking at what was going well and what wasn't going so well, but just having that actual space to sit and reflect on how things are going. And I think sort of within sort of like districts or sort of councils or whatever, I think more of that sort of collaboration and just looking at some of that stuff and the cultures, that's where I'd like to see stuff, and I think that's where we could see a bit of a change.
Brilliant. Okay, well, it's starting to come to an end of today, and I just wondered if, you know, we've got lots of people with us today. If there was one bit of advice you could give to take that leap of faith, what would it be? And I haven't prepped you for this, so I'm really sorry.
Well, my bit of advice is just to start somewhere, because it'll never be right, you know, you will never get to that perfect place of because there'll always be something that comes along that, you know, shifts or changes or whatever. But, you know, I mean, I actually emailed our comms team yesterday and said, you know, we've still got the word vulnerable people on our website because there's one page that hasn't been changed, you know, but actually you've got to keep doing it. and not be disheartened. I mean, you know, we had a situation not very long ago where, you know, one of our partners called us out because they'd got this referral form that someone had done in all best intentions that was absolutely horrendously deficit based. And so, but what was great is that we're there saying we're really strength based, and so our partner felt able to come to us and another organisation and say, what's this form then if you're strength based? So I think kind of putting it out there and saying, you know, this is what we're trying to do, but also being open for people to go, you're not getting it right, you know, and learning all the time.
Brilliant. Thanks, Becky.
I'd say clear vision and just keep coming back to it. That's what I come back to all the time. What are we trying to do? And, you know, make sure that's front and center.
Yeah. And on the back of that, I'd say listen to people. And I think that's been the grounding and the driving force of everything we've done, is just taking the time not to assume, but to listen. And I think that has just been completely transformative as to even identifying what our vision ever was going to be.
My advice would be to look at what you're doing and see what you're actually achieving. That's how I looked at the organisation when I came in. It was like, what are we actually delivering here? And if it isn't what we really want to do, then we need to change it. And that was the basis that we got on board with the Mayday Trust and the work that you're doing, because we weren't delivering what we wanted to and what we thought we were.
Thanks, James.
I think I would say be bold, be brave, and stand by your convictions. So if you're the only one, you're the only service acting in this way, if those around you are still acting in a deficit focused way, don't stop what you're doing, work with them so that they understand why you're doing this and what the benefits of it actually is. So don't step back just because someone else is challenging it and not operating in the same way as you. Sort of be strong and keep going and have that conversation with them and explain why. Don't put a barrier up. Don't let it become a point of negativity or frustration. Just communicate and explain why you're doing this and the fact you will continue to do this, and it's part of that wider change that you want to achieve.
I would just echo both Becky and Sarah. Be brave and step in at whatever point that you are. So if you truly believe this, it doesn't matter what point you are, step in, because the change will happen. And even if you're just stepping in a very small point in a very small way, because it is the right thing, and we truly believe that it is, people will follow you and you'll start to make that change, and it will become a bigger change. But you've got to start somewhere. So my thing is start somewhere.
Yeah, I suppose for me it's just being open-minded and thinking of this, echoing what other people have said, but just thinking about what you're actually trying to achieve and what you're doing. I think sometimes it can be quite consuming around, you know, case notes, risk assessment, doing this, achieving all these things, and so much your week can sort of be consumed by other things. That just remembering like what you're hoping and why you're working in this line of work and what you're trying to achieve, really. So
Thanks.
yeah.
So really a nod to Aretha, I think, with our Think theme tune. And I think, you know, there was just a lovely thing that, and it came out of the qualification again, and somebody said it's not about saying it's all wrong, it's about making it our social responsibility to question it. And I like that. So I'm going to wrap up and just want to say thank you to everybody for taking part. This, like I said, you know, this is all of our space. It's not just us in the panel. This is, you know, the point of the alliance is for everybody to own the space, to own your voice. You know, if you've got a fire in your belly, take it somewhere, you know, share it. If you haven't already, please do have a look at the New System Alliance website. So it's newsystemalliance.org. There's some stuff in there around, it's called the New System Lab, which you can find out a bit more of some of the stuff we've been talking about, qualifications, innovation partnerships, all that sort of stuff. So if you want to do something and it feels like the thing you want to do, then go and have a dig around. We've got one more session this afternoon, which is the New System Alliance session. So if you can make it, I hope to see you there. But I want to say thank you to everybody and good luck.
Thank you.